Well, been a lot said about changing your mind, but I was going to preach a lesson on the Holy Spirit. But since we're going to have that on in our study on Wednesday nights or Sunday, I'll change my mind. I was going to preach a lesson on growth in the church and what the church needs to be doing, and then its growth. But I changed my mind. And I could go on and on and on, but I changed my mind. Changing our mind is something that we do a lot of, don't we? I remember, and I have to remember because I don't do it anymore, but I remember when we lived over on Rogers Drive, I had to cut my grass. I had to rake the leaves when they fell off the trees. I had to crush them up when they fell on the ground and it was killing my grass that I'd put out. I had to put the crushed up leaves on my garden, but I've changed my mind. I don't do that anymore. Changed my mind. And so as I thought about I changed my mind, I thought about doing a sermon on I changed my mind. And the first character I'd like for us to look at is Zechariah. A little humor in all of this. The sermon starts with an introduction like this. You know why women's minds are so fresh? You were ahead of I didn't even give you the punchline. Somebody has to volunteer, and I'll have to go home with you this afternoon because I won't be able to go to the house. But we change our minds, and Zechariah is one that needed his mind changed. The angel of the Lord came to him and said he's going to be a father at 90 years old. And he began to argue with the angel of the Lord and the angel of the Lord said, "Don't argue with me." And he struck him mute. And so during the time that Zechariah was mute, he changed his mind. He and Elizabeth had a baby. And you remember, there's John the Baptist. There was another man about that time. Of course, when I was thinking of Zechariah, I was thinking about Abraham. God told him he's going to bless him and all the nations, and he was going to bless one that's going to bless all the nations through him, and the nation was going to be greater than the sands of the sea and the stars of the sky. And Abraham was nearly 100, and Sarah was nearly 90, and she was barren. It's kind of like Zechariah, doesn't it? A man named Joseph was betrothed, had a Mary maiden that was betrothed to him, and he found out she was pregnant. That's what Ryan read for us a while ago. And Joseph decided, I'm not going to marry her. She's been running around on me. She's pregnant. How far from the truth could Joseph have been? And Gabriel came and said, Joseph, let me tell you something. That which is in Mary is there by the Holy Spirit. That which is in Mary is what's been promised of God. Guess what? Joseph changed his mind. He wasn't going to put her away. He's not going to put her away privately now. He married her, and the child that was in her became Jesus, our Lord. He didn't put her away. During that time, there were shepherds out in the field tending their flocks. You'll find this in Luke chapter 2. And while they were out in the field, they always usually bring their flocks together, and the shepherds would get together over a campfire, and they'd watch after the sheep and make sure that the wolves and the bears and the tigers and whatever else didn't get after them, and they're sitting around, and there appeared unto them an angel from heaven. The Bible says they were terrified. Bring it down to today's language, it scared them to death. It scared me to death. About the only thing that seen me is a trail going over the hill when I took off. And then there appeared unto them great host of heavenly beings. And they said, don't be afraid, for we bring you good tidings of great joy. And after the heavenly choir, so to speak, disappeared, they said among themselves, let's go to Bethlehem and see what they've been talking about. And so they did. And they went to Bethlehem, and from the signs that the angels gave them, to look for a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. I usually think about that sometimes when I go around the hospital and go by where all the little babies are being kept. How clean, how sterile, how nice everything is. Jesus was born in a manger, a barn, a hewn out place in a cave, just that's all it was, just hewn out place, lying in the manger, which is a feed trough, wrapped in swaddling clothes, the best that Joseph and Mary had for him. I appreciated the lesson several weeks ago when Ron asked us, what do you think the world would be like had there not been a Bethlehem? What do you think the world would have been like had Jesus never been born? What do you think the world would be like? Yeah, I'm not going to ask you what you wrote on your paper. I'll tell you what I wrote on my paper. If Jesus hadn't been born in Bethlehem, there wouldn't be a world, in my opinion. We'd already killed one another. But Joseph and the shepherds changed their mind. There were 3 wise men that came from the east. What are you looking at me like that for? Was there not 3 wise men? Everybody's saying, Well, that's right. We don't really know how many there were. Could have been just 2. Could have been 5. Could have been 10. The Bible just simply says in Matthew chapter 2 that there was Magi came from the east. And they went to the capital city and went to Herod the king and said, show us where this new king is to be born. Herod didn't know anything about it. Now that's how religious he was. He wasn't even looking for the Messiah. And here these Magi come from the east. They were looking for Christ and looking for him in the wrong place. Very often that happens to us, or it happens to some of our friends. We go to looking for Jesus and we look for him in the wrong place. And Herod said, ask his wise men, what are they talking about? And they told him, and he said, went out in his evil sort of way, said, now when y'all find him, come back by here and tell me so I can worship him too, knowing all along all he wanted to do was go down there and kill him. He didn't want any heirs to the throne. He didn't want anybody following him as king. The Magi didn't know that, but they took directions and found out that the prophecy that in Micah that he's going to be born in Bethlehem was going to be right, and so off down to Bethlehem they went. And there we find the 3. What were the 3? The 3 gifts. Frankincense, gold, and myrrh. And they always assign that there was 3 wise men bringing 3 gifts. We don't know, but they had 3 gifts. And being warned in a vision during the night, they went home a different way. They went home a different way. Friends, let me say, we don't have time to expound on this right now, but sometimes some of us need to find Jesus and go home a different way. We can't keep following the same paths that we've always followed. We can't keep living the lives we've always lived. We need to go home a different way, because Jesus will change you. Jesus will change you. Let's go down to Jerusalem for a moment for this next change of mind. The Passover, Joseph and Mary have gone down to Jerusalem as they do every year. They've taken the boy Jesus with him. He's about, that's right, we're not in class, are we, Steve? I got to answer my own question. He's about 12 years old. And so there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews in Jerusalem because of the holidays or because of the feast or whatever it was. And they didn't hardly keep up with everybody. And so after time, it was time to go home, and Mary and Joseph started out in the caravan as they started north, and after about a day's journey, Mary said, Joseph, you seen Jesus? No, I thought he was with you. No, he's not with me. Is he not with you? No, he's not with me. Well, he must be up ahead somewhere with some of his friends. You know, that's the way it used to be. Even when I was growing up. Mom and Dad would sit down to the supper table, and Mom might say, where's Tommy? And he'd say, he's down the street at Zane's having supper down there. He's up the street with Steve and having supper up there. Not the same Steve. Up the street with another Steve. Well, that didn't bother them, because sometimes Zane would be at our supper table, Steve would be at our supper table. That's just the way it was. And they just didn't think nothing about it. So, and after a while, they got worried because they couldn't find him. You know what that reminded me of? And Tilly's not here, but it reminds me of a sermon that Brother Laird had. And a lot of you remember it, titled, Going Home Without Jesus. Many of us go home without Jesus. So they went back to Jerusalem, and they found him in the temple. Can you imagine the scribes and the priests and the wise men that were there, and he's sitting up on a table, and they was asking him questions, and he was answering them. He'd ask them a question, and it would be a deep theological question, and then they'd have to go look it up or find somebody else, and then they'd ask him a question, and he'd tell them. You know, they changed their mind about this little 12-year-old boy. He's not a 12-year-old boy. He is far beyond what we think of and see as a 12-year-old boy. Well, he was the Son of God, right? But you know, it brings us a thought. What's in our classes Sunday morning and Wednesday night? There's a place in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's at the Mennonite Tourist Center, Visitor Center. It's a full-fledged, full-scale tabernacle. If you're ever up that way, I encourage you to go by the Mennonite Visitor Center and see this full-size tabernacle on site. It's amazing. Or we read about it in the Bible, and we've seen the little models, but it's amazing to see it full-size. And they have tours, and just so happened, when Wanda and I and the boys went by and visited that particular, we was coming back from Pennsylvania, visiting Barbara and Dick, and we were coming back, and somebody had mentioned it to us, so we stopped to see it. And it just happened, and in our class, teaching the boys and the other kids, young people here at church, we've been studying about the Jews wandering in the wilderness and the tabernacle. So as we were going through the tabernacle, our guide was a Mennonite, and he began to ask all these questions. And Clint hadn't changed any. Don't y'all tell him I said so. But he just started answering all these questions. And then we'd go a little further, and the guide would ask another question, and Clint would tell him about that one too. We got around the most holy place, and he said, what is this? Clint told him what that was. He asked him what was in it. Clint told him what was in the hole. Finally, he looked at me and said, y'all members of the Church of Christ, aren't you? I said, well, how did you know that? He said, I don't have many kids that come in here and know what he knows about the tabernacle. I didn't bother to tell him. I just got through teaching it. I was too proud, both as a Bible teacher and as a father. Jesus, young people, knew who he was, where he came from, and what he was supposed to do. And in fact, at the end of that, it says, and Jesus went home with his parents. Mary said, "Where have you been? Your daddy and I are just worried to death." And he said, "Didn't you not know that I needed to be about my Father's business?" That's right. And he went home and obeyed his parents and grew in wisdom with the Father and man. The wise men and the scribes and the Pharisees in the temple changed their mind. This is not just some ordinary little boy off the street. He knows something. In John chapter 4, we have another meeting. Jesus needed to go north to Galilee, and in going north to Galilee, he didn't take the usual journey of way around this way, so he didn't walk through Samaria. He went straight up through, right by the River Jordan, and right up toward the Sea of Galilee, and he got into the country, province, or whatever they called it, of Samaria. And he went by this well. In fact, it was Jacob's well, and the woman was out there drawing water. He says, the disciples went off into the town to buy something to eat. I'm sure they're running down to the Golden Arches to get them some hamburgers, boys. And he asked her to give him a drink. That tells us Jesus was not only divine, but Jesus was also physical. He got tired and he got thirsty. She was shocked. She was out to draw water by herself, not in the usual group of a large number of women that came out and drew water together as a social event every morning. That tells you something right there. But Jesus took a drink and told her he'd give her water that she'd drink, she'd never have to thirst again. Changed her attitude in a hurry. She was worried that he, a Jewish man, would speak to her, a Samaritan woman. She was worried that he, a Jewish man, probably a rabbi, would have anything to do with her, a Samaritan woman. And then he said something about calling her husband, and she says, I don't have a husband. And that gets modern right here. He says, well, you said right. And the 5 husbands you've had, the one you're living with now is not your husband. That's sad. That's sad that our society has come to the place where men, our young men and young women, decide, well, we'll just live together and try it a while. Come on, girls and boys. We don't live together and try it a while. I'll tell you what you do. I want to drive a brand new Mercedes-Benz. I'm going to run over to the dealership tomorrow, and I'm going to say, I see that red one right there. I want to take that one, and I want to drive it around for 6-7 months to see if I like it. They'd call a meat wagon on me. What are you talking about? I'm not going to let you drive that. Well, that's what everybody else is doing. They're moving in with each other to try each other out to see if they want each other, and then they decide whether they are or they aren't going to get married. No, that's not what it's about, and that's what that fellow said. You get yourself out of here. I ain't giving you nothing. Well, they got, the business world got more sense than that. What is it grandmother used to tell us? They want their cake and eat it too. They ain't going to have it that way. That Samaritan woman changed her mind. She went running back into the city, and from a woman who was living with a man who was not her husband and had 5 husbands and that she had been divorced, she ran back in and she didn't even talk about that. She said, come, I want you to come out here and see a man who knew everything there was to know about me. Does that not shock you just a little bit? I read that and I thought, man, that's magnificent. That's magnificent. Jesus knew everything that needed to know about her. Bring it home. Bring it home. How many of you here have anything in your life that Jesus doesn't know about? None of us. Jesus knows everything there is to know about us, from what we think, to what we say, to what we desire, to what we are, because Jesus is Jesus, the Son of God, and He knows us. So let's don't run around thinking we're going to hide anything from Him, because He already knows it. Go back to the Garden of Eden for just a moment. Adam and Eve had sinned, and they had gone into the garden and tried to hide their sin and sewed together fig leaves, and they were ashamed of their nakedness. And when God came walking in the garden in the cool of the evening, they tried to hide themselves. And what did God say? Adam, where are you? Did God not know where Adam was? Well, certainly He knew where Adam was. Well, what's the point of the question? Adam, do you know where you are? There's the point of the question. And that question is asked to that woman, that the Samaritan woman at the well, and is asked of us even today. Do you know where you are? Because God knows where you are. Do I know where I am? Because God knows where I am. But I hadn't said that to anybody. It don't make any difference. God reads our hearts. God knows. We read on down a little bit further in John. In chapter 19, we find there that his siblings, his brothers and sisters, half brothers and sisters from Joseph and Mary, they didn't believe in him either. They had their doubts that he was the Messiah. They had their doubts that he was the Son of God. They had, I don't know why, based on all the evidence that had been given, but they had their doubts. But you know what? Through the things that he did, the blind began to see, the deaf began to hear, the lame began to walk, the dead began to rise from the dead. Are those things not true? Sure they're true. If that book is true, that's true, and that book is true. They changed their minds and said, our half-brother, Jesus of Nazareth, is the Son of God. I think the one that put me on putting this sermon together like this was a feller who was a Roman centurion. Centurion is the word for commander of 100. The Romans were in occupation of Palestine. The Romans were the greatest empire there was at the existence at that time, and they had the greatest and the meanest and the most savage army they talk about. You go back to Josephus or go back to some of the Roman historians and read how the armies marched across the nations, and just, it's terrible. But that was their army. And the men who they promoted to be over 100 were horrible. Some of the things that they did, horrible. And there's one particular centurion, and his group, squad, whatever they were called, was over Golgotha at this particular time. And they'd gone down in the city. They had 3 prisoners that they were taken to take outside the city to the place called Golgotha and crucify them. He was over also the guard that scourged him. And the Bible there just says, and he was scourged. I'll tell you, friends, brothers and sisters, scourging is not just scourging. It's not just a whipping. The Roman soldiers used to bet. They used to take the biggest, the strongest, and the meanest, and they'd take those whips and those whatever they used, and they would bet each other that they're going to kill the man that they're scourging. You don't kill him, I'll kill him. And many of those that were scourged didn't live through the scourging. And they enjoyed it. They had a lot of fun at that. When this centurion picked up the one they called Jesus of Nazareth, they saw the crown of thorns on his head. You know that there's more blood vessels in your head than anywhere else, and blood was running down his eyes and in his nostrils and in his mouth. And when he jerked him up by the arm and looked at his back, he thought to himself, well, they tried to kill this one. He put that big cross on his back and said, carry it. And Jesus fell, maybe knelt down, and he picked him up and said, carry it. He was dehydrated, had nothing to eat. Carry it. Just another slum, just another somebody under the bridge. Carry it. Jesus tried. And he stumbled. He fell again. Now the centurion, he's impatient. Man, I got things to do tonight. Let's get on with this thing. And he grabbed a big fella off the side, Simon, and said, take this cross for him. He can't carry it. I'm ready to get on with it. And went on up the hill. He said, I'll make him scream out. Put him on that cross and drove those nails in his hands and drove those nails through both of his feet. He might have got a groan out of him, but nothing more. He said, when I stand this cross up, you boys don't hold it. You just stand it up and let it fall down into that hole. Jerk him. Scrape that old bare back. Meet it up with all this scourging up and down that old rugged beam. He'll scream out then. He didn't. He didn't. He was there when the earth shook with that earthquake. He was there when the sun went dark. And even he had faint heart about what was happening. He was there standing close to that middle cross, listening as just whispers were coming from his voice about, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. Buddy walked up to him and said, what do you think? He said, I'll tell you what I think. This man's dying for somebody else. He ain't dying for himself. What? He's dying for somebody else. You know who you're dying for? Me. Tommy Dozier is the one that should have been hanging on that cross, not Jesus of Nazareth. You should have been pinned on that cross, not Jesus of Nazareth. And that old centurion, as mean as he was, changed his mind. Changed his mind. He acts like a person dying for somebody else. And he was. Truly, this man was the Son of God. Friends, brothers and sisters, there ain't no truly about it. Jesus was and is the Son of God. Thousands have changed their mind. Within a few years, on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, when everybody was happy that everything was going well, thousands heard Peter and the other apostles stand up and say, this man whom you crucified is the Son of God. This man whom you crucified died and shed his blood for your sin. This man, they didn't pull any punches. They changed their minds. And God added to the church that day 3,000 souls. And the church began to multiply. the disciples who became apostles, who had gone off during the crucifixion, who weren't there. John was there, and Mary was there, Mary Magdalene, some other. They were now standing up with boldness, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, death, burial, and resurrection. They changed their minds. They were no longer afraid of death. They were no longer afraid of dying. They were no longer afraid to be called followers of Jesus Christ. My friends, we're not doing this just out of habit. Millions upon millions upon billions of people since that day to this have changed their mind about Jesus Christ, have changed their mind about Jesus of Nazareth. And today is the day that if you haven't, you need to change your mind and your heart about Jesus. See, he's not dead. Like Steve said this morning, he died and was buried, and third day arose up to be our intercessor and sitting at the right hand of God. He's alive. He's here. He's there. He's there. He's there. He's there. He's here. He's everywhere. Ready to change your life and to change your soul. Jesus never changed his mind. Oh, I know he prayed in the Garden of Eden. Oh, I know that he knew he was going to have to die on that cross for me. Oh, I knew, and you know, that he had to die on that cross for you. But our Lord never changed his mind. Why don't you change your mind today? Why don't you give up that old thing that's keeping you away from Christ? Why do you give up that old thing that's trying to keep you from being sins washed away in the watery grave of baptism? Why don't you just give that up? You know, we're not going to have time after death. But Lord, but God, I'm not going to have time after death. You're just trying to frighten me. If that's what it takes to get you to heaven, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. You know, our theme around here has been, we're going to heaven and want you to go with us. We're not being agnostic about it. We're just telling you. Paul said, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown. You know, we have that assurance. We have that assurance. Same assurance Paul did. So why don't you change your mind today? Why don't you change your mind now and come to Jesus as we stand and sing?